Okay, I think our numbers are still increasing, but we'll go ahead and get started as we just have an hour. Again, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's session. Oh, excuse me here. Let me see here. Thank you for joining us for today's session. You are in the right place. So this is going to be one of Out and Equal's virtual offerings. You'll also notice that this is the second webinar in the virtual EXFO series. The Executive Forum, or EXFO, as we've come to call it, convenes LGBTQ and ally senior executives and business leaders from multinational corporations and federal agencies for professional development and in-depth exploration of the global landscape of LGBTQ workplace equality. We typically meet in San Francisco, but that is not possible this year. So we've gone virtual. Lecture components of the Executive Forum, such as today's, will be made available to the broader Out and Equal community. So thank you for joining us. It is okay if you are not part of Executive Forum, please still stay on the line. For those of you who are Executive Forum participants, please note that we do have a follow-up session with Dr. Iacovelli. So check your emails and the EXFO site for more information on that. And now I am absolutely thrilled to present today's special guest, Dr. Steve Iacovelli. So Dr. Steve Iacovelli, or the gay leadership dude, as he's known by some folks, is the owner and principal of Top Dog Learning Group, a learning and development, leadership, change management, and diversity and consulting firm based in Orlando. He's worked with Fortune 500 greats like the Walt Disney Company, Bayer, to amazing nonprofits like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the American Library Association, large universities like The Ohio State University and the University of Central Florida, to small entrepreneurial rock stars like International Training and Development and GovMojo, Inc. With over 25 years of experience in leadership, strategy, organizational learning, and communication, Steve is a rare breed of professional that understands the power of using academic theory and applying it to the corporate setting to achieve business results. And I can absolutely attest to this. Reading his new book, Pride Leadership, Strategies for the LGBTQ+ Leader to be the king or queen of their jungle, feels like having a conversation with a friend, a really smart friend. So I'll end by quoting one of the reviews on Amazon. I think encapsulates this nicely. Someone wrote in there, "The world needs singularly important voices like Harvey Milk's, but perhaps even more, it needs thousands of voices like yours and mine every day. In our workplaces, neighborhood associations, organizations, etc. This book is a wonderful, simple, understandable guide for how to take I want to we can. Over the next hour, Steve will share lessons from his book to help us hone our leadership skills so that together we can say we can." So please join me in welcoming Dr. Steve Iacovelli.
Hello, everyone. Hello, hello. Welcome. I'm going to do some magic behind the scenes here. It's really great to be here. I'm super excited to share some ideas, strategies, tips, tricks to make you an even more effective LGBTQ+ leader and ally, should we have any of those awesome rock stars in the audience as well. But as we go through this conversation here today, by all means, use the chat feature that's here in Zoom. This is as interactive as we can be in the Zoom platform, but hopefully you'll be able to grab a couple things out of here. But as we do that, one of the things I'd like to ask is, by show of hands, or you can use the chat, and by show of hands meaning the digital hand that you should have access to in your Zoom area, but who here would consider themselves a leader? Who here in this virtual room is a leader? So we got 210-ish friends, both online as well as on a couple on the telephone. So thank you folks who are non-visual. Looks like the vast majority of you have raised your virtual hands. Thank you for that. Because if you haven't, all of y'all are leaders, as we say here in the South. And I like to start this conversation that way, because a leader isn't just a person who has direct reports. It's somebody who is influencing and managing those around them. And that I absolutely know is everyone in this room. So thank you. You are a leader, and this conversation is truly about you. Isabel already did a wonderful introduction. Thank you again, Isabel, and the folks at Out and Equal for this opportunity. Steve Yacovelli, Doctor of Educational Technology. So this is a very timely time for my, my doctorate. Owner principal, Top Dog Learning Group, also known as the Gay Leadership Dude. We do a lot of things. Isabel already called this. I do like to point out that we are a certified LGBTQ owned business. So very proud of that. And what you're going to see over the course of the next 54 minutes or so is from the book that Isabel mentioned, Pride Leadership. You also had an opportunity to get a handout. I say that for topdog.click/6leader. That will redirect you to a Hightail site, which is just where I throw all my stuff. So hopefully your corporate friends will allow that. The handout's pretty significant. I'm going to refer to it quite a bit in our conversation here today because I'm going to take 25 years of leadership stuff, which I distilled into a 356-page book. And now we're going to get this in a 1-hour webinar and a 12-page PDF handout. So a lot of stuff in that bit of time. So just going to refer back to that if you would like. So with that being said, how did Steve come here? Well, I've had the privilege of working with a ton of leaders through the course of my career, both as an internal as well as an external consultant. And many of you in this virtual room I've played with, either you directly or your businesses, because I've really seen a lot of awesome leaders out there. I've seen some leaders that do a fantastic job. I've seen some leaders who, quite frankly, could, as we used to say at Disney, they had an area of opportunity to be a little bit better at their success. But that's kind of what I distilled into Pride Leadership. I'm happy to say we just won our second award a couple weeks ago. But I've taken those ideas that I've seen where people are rocking it and rolling it and being leadership successful and put that in here. And what we're seeing in this conversation is a very high level, I like to say like tapas flavored of this conversation. So I came up with 6 areas of focus that I feel are the top 6 competencies that really separate the okay to the rock star leader within our world. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about here over the course of this stuff today. So I got to warn you, I tend to be a fast talker. So for my friends who are translating in their head, I apologize. Also, there's a lot of content here. And I want to make sure that I at least touch upon some of these concepts. So hold on. This is a fast and furious conversation. It's meant to be that way. It's also meant to allow you to refer to what's in the handout or the PDF. So there's that. So we're going to stay at that 10,000 foot level, kind of high level here today. We're not going to deep dive, although I'll tell you some ideas where you can deep dive kind of at the end of our conversation here today. So with that being said, let's just dive right in, no pun intended, to our the first of our 6 competency areas, and that is really thinking about authenticity. And if you're ready for me to go ahead and move on through, to go ahead and type in the chat, yes, Steve, or something so I know you're ready to go. Go, 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 yes. Someone's typing nonsense or needs their keyboard adjusted. Awesome, lots of good stuff. Vamonos, I love that, fantastic. All right, let's talk about authenticity. When we think about authenticity, what does that look like in the modern corporate workplace? Well, if you think about it, it can manifest itself in a few different ways. Authentic leaders are truthful even when they feel different than the quote unquote company line. And you'll hear me refer to company or corporate, use that as the broad term like I do in the book. Workplace is maybe the better word. But really, as leaders, we sometimes get in those situations where we may not agree with what's being said or what the corporate line is. And you know what? An authentic leader acknowledges that. For example, I had a client I was working with that was migrating to an open office situation. And several years ago, that was when it was kind of the big thing. And a lot of the leaders weren't comfortable with it. And so an authentic leader is meeting with their team for the first time and says, look, team, we're moving to an open office environment. I have my reservations as well, but you know what? We're going to make this work together. And that's fantastic. An unauthentic leader is, we are going to a open office and it will be really great and it will be much better for us. People see through that. And when we'll talk about the benefits of authenticity in a few moments, but a real authentic leader allows their true ideas to come through, but in a supportive and comforting way. Authentic leaders have self-awareness of the skills that they have, and maybe even more importantly, the ones they don't. It's those folks who are in that leadership role who think they know everything. That's not an authentic leader. A true authentic leader understands what they bring to the table, maybe where their deficiencies lie. An authentic leader remains true to oneself, but is able to adjust their context. I want to dive a little bit deeper into that whole idea about a context when it comes to authenticity. And I use a story in the book, as well as when I've been working with clients for a while. And I equate it to, there's two Steves. I wouldn't say there's two Steves, but there's this Steve-o-meter, if you will. The Steve that you're seeing right now, the Steve that's usually in a keynote or a real classroom setting or wherever, is pretty upbeat, gregarious, fun. The Steve that maybe is hanging out with his great aunt Mildred might be a little bit different. Now, are they the same Steves? Of course they are. But we can dial that context a little bit different, understanding that who's around us, who we're relating to, things of that nature. Same idea when I'm in Europe doing workshops, I know to dial down the energy a little bit. I know to not smile as much. Does that mean I'm faking it? No, it doesn't. It means I understand from a leadership perspective the context around me, but I'm still being my authentic self and bringing myself to the virtual table or the real table, if you will. So a smart leader can manage their authenticity, remain true to themselves 100%, but also know how to dial that within the context of the situation, the people whom they're working with, etc. So why does this matter when we talk about authenticity? Because if you think about it, when you're authentic at work and elsewhere, it leads to trust. And I've had people say over the years, Steve, what's the #1 secret to leadership? Here it is. Get ready. This is the thing that's golden. Good leadership means you've built trust, period. I could have boiled my book down to one page with one word, trust, but I didn't. So any good leader, when you're being authentic, for example, you are instilling trust in folks either consciously or unconsciously. Yes, that's leadership gold. That's leadership success. And I challenge each one of you to be authentic because it does lead to that trust word. So how do you do this? How do you amp up your authenticity as you move into developing or further developing these things? Well, in the workbook, there is an activity. If you've never done this already, matter of fact, in my leadership training program we've been playing with, we just did this activity this past week, but it's identifying your own corporate values or personal value system. That activity in the handout is a way for you to try to boil it down to what are the 5 values that you personally have. And then what you do is look at that in relationship to what you're doing in the workplace. Are you being authentic to yourself? Those are your core values as feed your soul, or however you like to phrase it. Yeah, it's a great way to discover what's important to you, and then you put that in the context of the organization with which you work, and are they aligned, are they not? If not, then maybe have a conversation with yourself or your work wife or hubby, because having values that are personal values that are aligned with your corporate values is rock star important to all of us. And so that's one way to kind of look at your authenticity. When I was putting this presentation together, I was trying to find quotes that kind of summarize each of the 6. And this was my favorite one, even though it's technically not a tribute to Oscar Wilde, although it's a tribute to him, but it's never been founded. But be yourself, everyone else is taken. So be a rock star and be your authentic self in your respective workplaces, because that's not only going to feel better, but it's actually going to be more successful on your leadership journey. So with that being said, go ahead and give me a virtual hand raise if you're ready to move on to courage, the second of our 6. Look at all those digital hands. Fantastic. All right. So let's talk about courage and what that looks like from a rock star leader in the workplace. When we think about courage or courageous leaders in the workplace, it can look like a couple different things. The first is look around you to those small business owners, entrepreneurs, farmers, franchise owners. These are folks that are wicked brave, especially in today's interesting environment that we're in. So the woman here, Lindsay Lusher-Shute, she is a farmer, I think in Iowa, and there was a great interview with her, just looking at what is it like to be a farmer? How do you have that courage, that bravery in your day-to-day work? And there's a lot of data we can mine from the people who are doing those types of things, and we really want to understand, well, what does it take to be brave? And looking to those types of folks is a great way to understand what bravery looks like, which of course bravery is courage in the workplace jungle. A courageous leader is one that seeks honest feedback and are willing to have those difficult conversations. We'll talk about communication in a few moments, but a courageous leader says, you know what? I want to hear how I did in that meeting. I want to hear how I ran that Zoom call that we did the other day. I want to know what the outcome was for the process, the product, the meeting, the service, whatever. And sometimes that's hard to do, to seek it. Sometimes we just want to hear that was an awesome job, Isabel, nice job, woohoo. That's great, and we want that feedback. We also want the feedback that, you know what, Steve, you could have been a little bit better in that meeting because blah, 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 and the right feedback mechanism that we give. So a courageous leader is looking for that data, that information. A courageous leader is authentic. They are their authentic selves at work. Hey, Steve, you're cheating. You're using one to define the other? Yes. Yes, I am. All of these 6 competencies are not in little silos. They are so gorgeously intertwined, and this is a perfect example of that. I know my brothers and sisters in the workplace, my friends, colleagues, also brothers and sisters who are being their authentic selves, showing their gender identity and expression in their workplace. That takes courage. And I encourage all of you to look to those folks who are being authentic in the workplace as a source for what courage looks like in your workplace jungle. So 3 challengers to courage, or the three things that can get in the way of us being courageous in the workplace. The first is the fear of failure. No one likes to fail, especially when maybe we're concerned about our job longevity or things of that nature. So if we had that fear of failure, it can stop us from being courageous in the workplace. We might have the fear of the truth. Using the chat area, which of the orange circles is bigger? And while you're doing that, I'm going to tell you, the fear of truth. Some folks, kind of getting back to that honest feedback we just talked about, some folks don't want to hear the truth. They don't want to know which is the way to go, or how successful or unsuccessful that initiative we just did. And several of you, just as a side note, yes, the orange circles are exactly the same. Some people don't want to know that. They just want to, oh, that one's bigger. So it is an optical illusion, Brittany, very good. So, but as a leader, we want to make sure that the fear of hearing the truth doesn't stop us from being courageous in the workplace. We also want to make sure that the fear of change doesn't get in the way. And we'll talk about change a little bit deeper as we get into the 6 of our competency areas, looking at developing and cultivating culture. But the fear of failure, the fear of change can really get in the way of being courageous in our workplace. We want to be mindful that we're not falling into those courage challengers, if you will. So how do you amp up your courage as we move forward into the workplace jungle? So the first is, and I love this image, it took me forever to find something cool, try something new. And this is an image of a sport, both here in the States as well as in Canada. It is unicycle hockey. And I would venture a guess that the vast majority of the 251 people in this virtual classroom have not tried something like that. I know I have not. So, but studies show that when you try something new, you put yourself in that vulnerable situation, it's a way to amp up your overall courage. So try something new. And that could be in and out of the workplace. Looking at things from a workplace specific, try to delegate something. I know teaching leadership for so long, delegation is one of those things that a lot of people are like, ooh. Because why? Well, ultimately, if you're doing delegation correctly, I'm still accountable to what happens with those folks who are taking over the task or the role or whatever that I delegate to. Ultimately, it comes back to me. So that's a big trust thing going on there. Maybe it's I have the fear that they're not going to do it as well as I can. So getting back to those courage challengers, we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. So try to delegate a task to someone around you and see if that amps up your leadership courage. Another quote, be brave enough to suck at something new. Anonymous said that, but I thought it was such a great way to summarize this concept. Really try to be, whether that be something new at home, a new hobby, a new activity, maybe try something new within your workplace jungle. I think all of us right now in the age of COVID-19 are being forced to be a little bit more courageous, whether it be managing our own work selves, looking at maybe newer technologies for some of us. So this is a great opportunity. And again, I'm a glass half full kind of guy, but this is a great opportunity to try those new things because that just really amps up your leadership courage. All right. Before we move on to empathy, go ahead and give me a chat. Okay, Steve, ready to go. And before we play around with empathy. And yes, Ryan, steal that quote. It's one of my favorite quotes in this presentation. All right. You are also engaged. I love it. Empathy is the third of our 6 competencies to really think about to grow ourselves as a leader. What exactly does empathy look like in our workplace jungle? Well, first of all, when you look at an empathetic leader, they are self-aware of not only their own emotional state, but that's the emotional state of myself, the good and the bad. An emotional state meaning that, how am I feeling at any given time? And that could be the positive emotions, that could be the negative emotions. But an empathetic or a smart leader is one that is able to understand what my emotional state is at any one moment. And we'll talk about mindfulness in a few moments, but that's kind of the first way to know an empathetic leader. Second is an empathetic leader. It doesn't jump to conclusions when a coworker is in a quote unquote emotional state. I would venture a guess that there's so many of us who are not in our comfort zone, getting back to courage again. And when we're not in our comfort zone, that can lead to a lot of emotions moving about. And a smart empathetic leader says, you know what, I get it. I need to emotionally support my team in these weird times, not just give them, hey, here's how you use Zoom, or here's how you access our Google Drive with all of our documents on it, or whatever that looks like. Understands not jumping to those conclusions because someone's showing their emotions. A empathetic leader is seeing someone struggling and feeling the need to offer at least an ear to listen. I absolutely miss hugs at this moment in time. My dogs and my husband are like, okay, get off. We're tired of this, because I'm a hugger. I'm Italian. I'm a hugger. But it doesn't have to be a hug that an empathetic leader can give. It can just be like, hey, how you doing? Sending a text message, using technology, giving a call and actually lifting up the receiver. These are great ways for a leader to show that, you know what, I'm empathetic. I know this is not an easy situation. I know you're going through a rough time. What can I do to support and help you? So those are some of the ways that empathy kind of manifests itself in the workplace. Simon, I love your quote. Empathy is about finding echoes of another person in yourself. It's a beautiful quote. Thank you for sharing that. I want to go into actually somebody else's book for a few moments. And it's a fantastic book if you've never seen it. It's been around for about 10 years. It's called Switch, How to Change Things When Change is Hard by Chip and Dan Heath. There's 2 brothers. And in their book, they cite a professor who kind of goes through this concept or this idea of what he calls the elephant and the rider. And what exactly does that mean? Well, in the book Switch, they talk about the elephant and the rider, and that's actually representative of a person. So I am represented by both of the images here in yellow, as are every single 253 of you in this space. So in the book, it kind of gives the analogy that the rider is representative of the rational side of us. So it's things like data, logic, case studies. The logical side of us is represented by that rider sitting on top of the elephant. And the elephant is actually represented by our emotions, looking for things like story, suspense, surprise, metaphors. These are types of things that resonate with the elephant. And again, we are both things. We are both the elephant and the rider at any moment. And you can actually think about this as the rider is representative of our emotional quotient, our intellect, and the elephant, of course, is representing our emotional quotient, or EQ, as Daniel Goleman kind of talks about it. So the 2 items. So think about it. Let's say that I'm riding along in the jungle on my elephant, and I said, as the rider, I want the elephant to go left. Using the chat area, which way is the elephant going to go? I pull the reins left because I want the elephant to go take a left down the road. Marvin says right. Caroline says right. Belinda says left. Yeah, actually, the real answer is the elephant's going to go over wherever the heck the elephant wants. If it feels it in, yeah, I think I'll go left here, they'll go. But that's the whole idea behind this analogy, is as we think about things, we are the elephant and the rider, but our human emotions vastly outweigh our rational selves. And that's something to be very mindful of as an empathetic leader, to know that you can't always relate to humans on that logical level. You really have to understand that humans are emotional, messy, gorgeous creatures, and manage and lead to that idea. Because we often say that in the workplace, rational is awesome in business. No, emotions have no place here. Shenanigans. If you are a successful leader, you know that both of these are part of the workplace jungle, and we need to be mindful of that if we're going to be as successful as we can be from a leadership perspective. So, the size does matter. The rider, the emotion, they are in proportion to kind of how we humans interact. Because when we think about EQ, or emotional quotient, our emotional intelligence, it's really a combination of self-awareness as well as social awareness. So self-awareness is me and my emotional state. We talked about it a few moments ago. And then social awareness is the emotions of others around me. And having that leads to being an empathetic leader. Emotional intelligence is not about being touchy-feely, is not about being nice or just letting your emotions kind of all hang out for everyone to see. It's about being aware of your feelings and those around you, or others around you. And that's kind of the best way to summarize it. So smart leaders know that emotions are at play and have kind of their radar tuned to see what is the emotional state, not just the logical state, if you will, of those around you. How can you amp this up? Well, in the workbook, let me scroll my second screen. It's actually on page number 5 of the workbook, if you're following along. There is one idea, one activity that you can do in order to really beef up your empathy. And it's called the What Went Well Journal. It's a way for us to actually look at the positive emotions that we might have during the day. And the description's listed in there in the workbook. But just as a quick note, and I'm completely borrowing this from counseling psychology, and studies show that if I identify 5 things that went well over the course of the next few days, or over the course of the last 24 hours, excuse me. If I do that for about 2-ish months, 2 to 3 months, depending on my starting point, I literally rewire my brain to look for things in a positive nature. And it's called a heightened sense of awareness. There's a whole cognitive strategy behind that. But it's one way that we as leaders can amp up how we're looking at the emotions and understanding our own emotional state as we progress through our life as well. So just kind of getting through our next quote: smart leaders leverage both IQ and EQ to be successful, but also know that EQ eats IQ for breakfast, meaning that elephant is going to go where it wants to. We need to be mindful of that as leaders and kind of manage things accordingly. Ryan, yes, I love that. So with that being said, and using the chat area, any thoughts, questions, ideas as we kind of stop the first half of our competencies here? Use the chat to type it in. Meanwhile, I'll do my swag. All right. All right. Cool. IQ equal. Great recommendations. I use bullet journal and it's helped me a lot. Thank you, Jeff, for sharing that. EQ, IQ, not only for people who lead, but also for customers we work with. Totally well said, Jaco. Humans are emotional things, emotional creatures. It's the smart leader, whether that be leader to my people, leader to my customers, leader to my bosses, who understand and appreciate that. So awesome. Let's move into number 4 of our competencies, looking at communication and what exactly does that mean. So when we think about an effective leader, a smart leader knows and understands some of the concepts of communication. Okay, that's a wicked broad term, Steve. What do you mean by that? Well, it can look like a couple different things. A smart leader, an effective leader, a communicative leader, listens more than they speak. And I'm using both words, then and than they speak. What do I mean by that? Well, we are such a society that talks about, oh, we're listening, but then we're like this on the phone. And a smart leader understands that they need to hear what's being said by their team. We'll actually dive deeper into this one in a few moments. But they listen more than they speak, meaning I'm going to listen here and then I'll speak, or the combination is, it's 50-50 more than they speak. So smart leaders are aware of that and aren't just babbling or talking to hear themselves or share their story without hearing the rest of the team. And the team can be defined however you'd like it to be. A smart leader who's really embraces communication is really understands their nonverbals have to align or should align with what's being said. So RIP Grumpy Cat here used in the image. So if little Grumpy Cat's there and you're doing great. Is that in alignment to what, the words are saying, hey, Grumpy Cat, thanks. He says I'm doing great, but is he really saying that? And so a smart leader is mindful of, and there's that word again, is mindful of understanding that we don't just communicate through the verbal channel. There's lots of different ways we share our story, share our message. Things like gestures. If I'm standing like this in front of the classroom, I say, wow, that's a really great idea. You can get an impression from this type thing. Now, I've lived in Florida for 25 plus years. I just have thin blood. So I might be doing this only because I'm cold. That doesn't matter. A smart leader knows that I'm sending a message this way. It may not be what I intended. So you want to manage that and understand the alignment of your nonverbals, whatever that looks like, needs to go with what's actually being said or written or emailed or Zoomed or whatever you'd like to say. Robert, I had a boss that used to do that to me. Yeah, nonverbals actually send a lot more messages than the verbal, and there's several studies. Some of them have their issues, but as a general rule of thumb, yeah, just the verbal channel. There's a lot more to it than that. But smart leaders know that, hey, I need to adjust the delivery method to favor my audience, not just what I like to do. And you see this play out in folks who aren't as communicative savvy in the workplace. There's the folks who, oh, I just like to text or email. There's those folks who, no, I want to walk to your office and have a chat when we could walk to offices. We know that in a typical world, I know we're all inhibited a little bit with the situation right now, but a smart leader is mindful to not just rely on their own biased use of a method. They kind of think it through like, oh, who am I talking to? Oh, I know what. She likes to have a quick chat on the phone. That's totally fine. So being mindful of that is a really smart strategy for leaders who want to go ahead and kind of have that mentality. Isabel had a really good point. This is extra tough in the age of video conferencing. I have to regulate my listening face, which can come off as a little mean sometimes. I'm just focused. Yeah, and that's a really great point. So as we're going through this different world, or world that we're not so used to for some of us, you just have to manage the response. And so in Isabel's case, she might say to the people in that virtual team, hey, you know what? If you see my face do weird things, it's because I'm really just thinking what you said. Don't interpret it otherwise. Fantastic. That's a great way. When I'm doing this in the actual classroom, I tell people, I'm not defiant. I'm just cold because I'm from Florida. And they're like, oh, we get it now. So a smart leader manages those expectations so that the story is truly heard. So I want to go back to the listening thing. Just kind of thinking through what that looks like and what do we mean by that in order to be effective. So if we think about it, there's two different strategies you can play around with and are identified in the workbook to show that you are listening, that you're being an effective listener. The first is using paraphrasing statements. Things like, if I hear you correctly, ... or listening to you, it seems as if ... That does two things. Looking at one, that I'm saying, hey, you know what? I am listening to you and this is what I'm hearing. And two, you're just confirming what you heard, and the person you're having a chat with, they can say, no, that's not what I said, Steve. Let's go back up. Okay, cool. Man, sorry, I misheard that. Yes, Simon, you're absolutely right. It's coaching questions, coaching 101. But these are great ways to show people that you're listening, because guess what happens when people know you're listening? You're building trust with them. So get back to that trust word again. But in addition to paraphrasing statements, using open-ended questions is a fantastic way to show people that you are truly active listening. These are things such as, well, help me understand how you got to that perspective, or what other possibilities could there be? Again, yes, Simon, you're going to say these are good coaching questions again. You're absolutely right. But these are fantastic questions if you want to show those around you that you are engaging in what they're saying. You aren't just listening to hear your own self-talk, but you really are engaged and mindful of what they're saying and trying to understand what it is. Marvin actually had a quick question in the chat. Steve, how does the concept of managing up fit in with the 6 skills? Fantastic question. In a very, very quick nutshell, this isn't just about managing down or leading down. It's about leading across. It's about leading up. All of these strategies work within that context. So great question, Marvin. They are meant to be universal by design. So hopefully that helps. So these are there's a whole bunch of these listed out in the workbook on page number, at the bottom of page number 5. So you can kind of pick through those and just see what ones maybe resonate best with you. I always try to have a couple of these in my memory bank for when I'm having those conversations. Really a good way to kind of manage it through. Most people don't listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. Famed leadership guru Stephen Covey said that. And just think about this quote for just one moment. people don't listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. And that's what good leaders don't want to do. They want to listen to understand. They want to listen to what's being said, because not only is that a smarter strategy to be a more effective leader, it's again building trust and relationships with those you're having a conversation with. Another thing to talk about and I just want to touch upon it very quickly because it's one of my absolute favorite topics when I talk about leadership, is the concept of silent collusion. And using the chat area, what does that mean? And I would venture a guess that many of you in this room know what that means or might have a good idea. But what is silent collusion? See who has the nimble fingers to type that in there. Thank you for being honest. Akshay, no idea. That's okay. Avoidance strategy, being a bystander, acceptance for silence, collective silence when no one says anything, you fear retribution. Yes, you're absolutely getting this. The concept of silent collusion, as we think about it from your leadership success, it's the practice of neither supporting nor defending the rights of others to be fully included in the workplace. And I often tell a very true story that happened to me a couple years ago. I was in Atlanta, and this actually, I wrote the story in the book as well. But it's where I was in Atlanta doing like a final meeting with clients. We were finishing up a project. There was everybody in the project team from the client, myself and one of my top doggers, which is what I call the consultants who work with me. And we're sitting there, and just as the meeting's about to start, everything's kind of dying down. And there was a leader at the very head of the table, literally the gentleman who wrote our checks, high up in the organization. And I say gentleman because that's important to the story. And just as the conversation's about to start, you hear him say, well, you know how all women drive. And everyone just kind of like stopped and looked at the end of the table toward him, and we're just like, what now? But no one said a word. So at that moment in time, everybody in the room was actually engaging in silent collusion. We were tacitly supporting the stupid comment that this executive had said. And so I'll tell you the end of the story in just a few moments. But we as leaders don't want to engage in silent collusion. Why? Because it's a great way to undermine your own credibility and really erode trust that you might have with those around you. And in the book and in the handout, I leverage the awesomeness of Sam here to kind of teach the 6 concepts to remember to combat silent collusion in your workplace. And if anyone knows in the chat what type of dog Sam is, go ahead and type it in there. And yes, John, Sacha Baron Cohen, who is America, yes. He's a hairy one. He's a cute one. Craig got it, the first one. He's a pulley mop, or mop dog for short. Well done, Craig. He knows his dog. And Marco got it, mop dog. Yes. So Jessica and Andy also got it correctly. Sam here is a pulley mop, or mop dog for short. So if we take his name and the type of dog he is, we create Mop Sam, and this is the 6 ways we can beat silent collusion in the workplace. And side note, this is wicked cheesy, and I absolutely acknowledge it. But what I found over the years is that when you think of acronyms or gimmicks or things that can really help things stick in the mind, it's a cognitive trick, it helps. So there's 6 ways that I identify in the handout on how to be more inclusive in your language and not engage in silent collusion in your workplace. And this gets tough. I'll be very frank. This is now we're pulling in that courage thing that we talked about a little bit ago. But really it's 6 strategies that you can kind of dive deeper into the handout. I do want to tell you what happened to the story. So as situation unfolded, you know how all women drive, and everyone kind of looked at him like, what? I'm about to say something, and Lori, my top dogger, kicks me. She's like, wait. I'm like, and what seemed like 20 minutes of silence is only a few moments. But at the kind of, not even at the table, kind of sitting against the wall, this young gentleman who kind of just joined the project team, he just folded his arms and he went, damn. And it was, so that kind of led people to be like, yeah, Bob, and we'll pretend Bob was the name of the executive. Yeah, Bob, what do you mean by that? So that particular strategy that was used to kind of beat silent collusion, where this gentleman said, damn, he was sending a very clear signal that I'm not on board with this. That's the say strategy. Say a non-word to indicate that you don't agree with what has just been said. And so there's other strategies that you can play around with. But it's really important as leaders who want to be inclusive, who want to be effective, that you are not seen engaging in silent collusion. Again, you erode your own trust, and it's a really interesting way to really show your leadership courage in the face of people not being as inclusive as we'd like them to be. Or Simon just said, see something, say something. Very good. Again, there's a whole bunch of data and details in the handout. I also created a little, we call them learning tapas, on how to play around with the MOPSAM method. So you can also play around with that for free. It's kind of in there. But you now have two ideas or two ways to amp up your communication strategy as you get into the workplace and really want to beef up your own communication skills. So with that, if you rearrange the letters in listen, they spell silent. You maybe didn't know that. If you rearrange the letters in conversation, you can spell voices rant on. And just for giggles, if you rearrange the letters in Elvis, it means he lives. So just coincidence? I don't know. But anyway, at least the first two are good ones to know. Silent and listen do indeed use the same letters. So be mindful of that as you engage in being a more effective leader from a communication perspective. 5 out of 6 of our conversation here with the top 6 competencies is about relationships and fostering and building relationships. And what does that look like in the workplace jungle? Well, the first is a leader is listening more than they speak. And what, Steve? You're cheating. You're using the same clip art again. Yes, I am, for a reason. Smart leaders who are listening are doing double duty. They're not just listening from a communication perspective, they're also building relationships because people feel that you're listening to them, you're engaging with them. You're not just listening to respond, you're listening to understand. And that's a great way to also build relationships. A smart leader who's building relationships maybe invites a special guest star to team meetings to broaden their perspective. What does that look like? Well, maybe I'm leading my team or I'm part of a team and we're say in marketing. And we invite an accounting person to come and hear what we're working on. And you might be saying, well, what value does that add? Actually, a lot. It does 2 things. One, it can show things from a completely different perspective, because if you're like me, sometimes we get into our own weeds and our own thoughts and ideas, and you start throwing around jargon that's indicative of our workplace or the profession we have. And having that fresh set of eyes and ears can be like, wait, what do you mean by that? Or have you looked at it from this perspective? Because as an accountant, this is how I would see it. It's like, wow. So it does that. It's great. 2, it's also building relationships with that person, because you're seeking them as a subject matter expert from their perspective, even if they have nothing to do with your business. That's a beautiful way to start to build relationships with those within your workplace jungle. And then 3rd, leverage technology to not just hinder relationships, but foster them. And I think as we think about people who have been successful in this COVID-19 world, are people who are doing just this. They are getting on LinkedIn and checking in with friends. They're reaching out through email and saying, hey, I just want to say hi. How's it going? How are you handling all this? What can I do to make this a little bit more bearable for you? They're getting on Zoom and having not just meetings, but maybe saying, hey, let's do a virtual coffee one-on-one and just like check in like we would have done in the workplace in a normal time. So smart leaders are not looking at technology as a hindrance to building relationships. It's a way to actually foster them. So let's talk about fostering relationships. What's kind of funny when we look at the other competencies is if I start to engage in being my authentic self, leveraging my courage, having empathy, using those communication strategies we talked about, guess what happens next? You're automatically building relationships, because those are all involving other people. And when I'm being my authentic self at work and I'm showing that to other people, you're just fostering that connectedness, that rapport, and that's fantastic. So that's kind of the cool benefits of looking at the first 4 that we played with, is that actually, free gift with purchase, you're able to actually foster relationships around you. There's another way to look at building relationships within our workplace, and it's kind of making sure that as a leader, we approach things from 4 different perspectives to support our team. And again, remember, a team can be just your peers around you. It's having what we call the I focus, and that's having that one-on-one conversation with folks. So it could be virtual, could be face-to-face when we're there, but it's really just having that sit-down chat with somebody in order to gauge a way to foster that relationship. It might be the brain focus, where I'm using my intellectual development. And this might be a little bit more appropriate if you have team members, but you can still use it for those around you. So it's really saying, how can I engage them on a cerebral or intellectual perspective? Maybe it's saying, hey, here's an interesting project that you might resonate with you, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe it's the heart focus. How am I inspiring those around you? I'm not saying that it's looking at motivation, and we don't have time in this conversation. Motivation, you cannot motivate someone, but you can create and be inspiring to them. And I dive deeper in the book around that idea. But what are you doing as a leader to inspire those around you to build those relationships? And then it's, of course, what we call normative influence, AKA management by walking about, when we used to be able to do that. It's saying, am I displaying or showing what it is that I'm trying to foster in those around me? So those are just kind of some other ideas in addition to what we talked about earlier to foster your relationship building skills. So talked about grow the first four in order to grow your leadership relationships. And I like to use the adage, never caffeinate or dine alone. There's an asterisk on that because sometimes we just want to not be with others. But you know, if you have the opportunity, even virtually, find ways to connect with folks. I know I've been doing some virtual lunches with folks, saying, okay, let's meet here, bring your lunch, or you know, we'll do it after lunch if you don't want to watch people eat. But find those ways to still maintain those connections. It's a great way to look at how we foster those relationships. Again, those are in the workbook as well. Best leadership advice that I've ever received, true story, it's from my mom. She said, don't underestimate the power of the admin, and she's absolutely right. Build relationships with everyone, not just the top dogs. And I put this at the end because some people think, oh, building relationships with my peers or my bosses. Yes, and make sure you're not neglecting others around you, because all those relationships are fantastic ways to beef up your leadership effectiveness. Okay. So with that being said, give me a virtual hands up to go to our last of the 6 competencies here. Look at all those virtual hands. Woohoo! All right. Cool. So number 6 of the top 6 is building and fostering culture. And what does that look like from a leadership effectiveness and success? Well, first, it's those leaders who really engage in thinking about cultivating and shaping their organizational culture, isn't afraid to ask questions and challenge the status quo. Yes, people aren't the most effective leaders in the world. Why? Because they're not asking that exact question. Why? Why are we doing it like this? Well, why are we approaching that project this way? And it's not being that like, I'm going to poke holes in you, ha ha ha. No, it's sincerely asking, is this the right way to do it? I've often hear with clients like, well, that's how we've always done it. Well, is it really the right way to do it now in 21st century in 2020? Maybe, maybe not. But smart leaders aren't afraid, so there's that courage thing again, to ask those questions and challenge that status quo. They support team members through changing times. And I would love to get, it's actually a whole other workshop on how we manage things in a time of change. But it's really a smart leader is saying, you know what, if I look at my organizational culture, I am going to support the team members, especially in times of change, and finding out what is it that each one needs and really be there to support them. It might be just knowledge. It might be just that elephant needs a little bit of care and feeding from the emotional perspective. Well, what is it that people need, especially when change happens? And as a leader, I look for ways to actually improve my organization. I believe Robin Ann just said continuous improvement. Yes, exactly right. Smart leaders who understand their culture are always looking for ways to improve the organization. And we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like in just a few moments. If we think about 4 ways that I can personally support the idea of a culture of change within my workplace. So the first thing I do is think about myself. Don't resist the change, and that's easier said than done. I know a lot of leaders who I've worked with over the years just aren't comfortable with change. That's a human reaction, quite frankly. It's a safety mechanism, and there's all sorts of reasons why we humans tend to not like change. But be mindful of where you're at in the concept of change and don't resist it yourself, because I can't expect others to go along with any sort of change if I personally am not on board with it. And people, again, that authenticity thing, they'll see when you're not like on board with it. Smart leaders will provide resources for others, kind of ties to the concept we just talked about a few moments ago, but really sit there and say to folks, what do you need? Oh, you're not good with Zoom? Hey, let me look online or call our IT friends and say, hey, do you have any sort of tutorials that I can share with my team on the best practices for Zoom? Stuff like Out and Equal is doing right now with the online series. Great support for people who are going through times of change, and leaders can kind of point people toward that right direction. As a leader, we want to help shape the culture. We don't want to just sit back and let the culture happen around us. We want to be involved. We want to try to get our seat at the table. We want to make sure our voice is heard. That may or may not be in your job description. Doesn't matter. Smart leaders, courageous leaders, getting back to that, really approach things and say, hey, how can I influence what's happening in my workplace culture around me? And smart leaders champion and hold others accountable in times of change. So it's, I know most organizations I work with have their organizational cultural values, and those don't go away in a virtual or working remotely setting. So how are we still holding ourselves accountable to that? How are we driving change and supporting the resilience of those around us, as well as looking at holding people accountable? Shameless plug for Isabel, some of the virtual offerings. So yes, other things to support folks. So those are just 4 ways that we can start to think about looking at change within our workplace as a leader. One of the strategies to amp up your own leadership courage here, or your leadership ability to facilitate culture, is to just look at your organizational culture and find one thing that really needs changing. And there's some ideas on how to approach that in the workbook, but take the ownership, take charge, try to change things. Maybe it's something like, you know what, my workplace isn't as inclusive as I'd like it to be. Our HR forms are still antiquated with the binary use of gender. Great. Spearhead that, go to your HR friends and say, we need to update this in order to be more inclusive, or whatever is the right approach for you. But you have ownership of that. You are part of the workplace culture. Go out and use that. It's a great way not just to change your culture, but also be a more effective leader. You can't become who you're supposed to be if we continue to stay who we are. And I think that's a great thing to kind of end on with this topic, is you have the power to create and facilitate change, to migrate, to adjust. You just have to take ownership to do that. And with that being said, as we round out this, that's the 6. And there's a lot that we obviously stayed at that high level, but I wanted to at least give you some ideas, tickle the brain there a little bit, provide you with some support on the handout to really think about ways that you can amp up your own leadership awesomeness. Your challenge then is to go back and reflect on these 6 and say, what's the one that I really want to focus and develop myself on? And dive deeper, use the things I talked about in the handout, what we talked about here in this conversation, and play with that, get comfortable with it. And then once you feel good in that sense, move on to the next one. Because I guarantee if you beef up all 6 of these, you will be the most rock star leader in your workplace. These are the ones that really can make a difference for you and those around you in your workplace jungle. I do want to quickly say one opportunity to dive a little bit deeper, because we said at the beginning, we're not diving deep. But if you want to dive deep, Isabel already kind of talked about this. Well, we are doing a kind of a COVID freebie where you can actually get the Pride Leadership book for free. All you do is have to pay for shipping and handling. Sadly, this only works for my US friends, so I apologize for my non-US friends. It's just the dollars, so that I'm not losing money as a small business who's already kind of in that group. Of course, the book is critically acclaimed. It is award-winning. It's appropriate for allies too. I've had a lot of my ally friends, I actually see a few in this virtual room already reading it, and so they can get into the dad jokes as well. So hopefully that kind of makes it. It is available on Kindle, Chris, on Amazon. Steve on Amazon.com. It focuses on the 6 competencies we just talked about, but goes a lot deeper in them. So if that's kind of an area you want to play with. We also just launched an 8-week training program that goes even deeper with these. And then I'm doing a bunch of keynotes and virtual things for Pride Month as well as beyond. But why Steve telling you this? Because my completely not hidden agenda is to really start and fan the flames of an LGBTQ leadership movement. I think that we as a collective community have so much power. And organizations like Out and Equal, like NGLCC, like some other great groups are trying to lightning rod and channel that. I'm just trying to do it as well. And I think collectively, all of us together can really, really, really make the world so much more inclusive and better. So that's my completely not hidden agenda item for sharing this with you. And with that being said, I want to open up to any questions, thoughts, ideas you might have for what we just talked about. And Isabel, feel free to jump back on as well if you'd like to.
Yes, I'll give folks a minute here, and then I do have a couple of housekeeping updates to share with folks.
Awesome. Got asked to type in the link to the
I think I have one question. Any additional recommendations on applying this to the virtual world?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question in the age of COVID. The first stop I would do is the communication stuff. So I think it was even you, Isabel, that noted that this is harder to do in a virtual setting. Yes. When I was getting my doctorate's actually in instructional technology and distance education, and the very first thing I learned in that program was that smart distance learning or distance communicating efforts should try to get as close to the face-to-face as you can, and I think that still holds true. So. Make people turn on their darn cameras. I see way too many people in my Zoom meetings who are just like, no, I don't want to be seen. No, turn them on. You can't walk into a boardroom with a bag over your head so we can't see you. So why do the same thing in the virtual just because you can? And I think thinking through things from that starting point, and it also leads to the building relationships part. Find those ways to still use technology to connect with those around you, even though we're in that socially distanced experience. So those would be the top two things that I could recommend. And yes, Ryan, I am preaching on purpose. Other thoughts, questions?
And as those come in, I just, being mindful of time, want to circulate. Oops, sorry. And I forgot how to turn on my camera. Guys, I put on blush for this and everything.
Oh, man.
Okay, so really quickly, just want to tell folks, those of you who are registered for Executive Forum, please note that Dr. Steve will be joining us again on June 11th. We're not done with him for an informal discussion. During this group discussion, you'll have the opportunity to share your successes and ask any leadership questions you may have around this content, from how you can express your authentic self in the workplace to building relationships. No leadership, qualified, no leadership topic is off the table in this exclusive group coaching opportunity. So please bring your questions. If you are registered for EXFO and have no idea what I'm talking about, that means some emails are getting lost. So please email me at iporras@outandequal.org, and I'll chat that in for a second. And before we sign off, I do just have a couple more announcements for everyone on the call. Bear with me, please. Our next session is this Monday, as you can see on the screen here. So please join us for a Pride kickoff, where we'll hear from our CEO, Erin Uritis, and kick off our month of celebrations together. Next Thursday, join us for an interactive experience to help you build your storytelling skills while also crafting your personal narrative. So our guest speaker, J.D. Schramm, is a Stanford professor and author of Communicate with Mastery, Speak with Conviction, and Write for Impact. That lecture session will be open to everyone. EXFO attendees from the Leveraging Narratives cohort, you have additional sessions with Dr. Schramm there. Again, there's more. I already shared that link earlier of our virtual offerings, so you can go online and see everything that is past, present, and future. So I want to thank everyone. Finally figured out how to turn on the screen. See, put on blush, which is basically a full face of makeup in quarantine mode. But to thank you, Dr. Steve, for joining us, and thank you everyone for being on the call. I know there were a number of questions. We will be sharing the recording. We will be sharing the deck. We will figure out how to get that workbook to everyone. And as I was saying, I personally recommend reading the book. I'm working through it as well. It's so very excited to bring my questions to that EXFO June 11th session as well. So with that, thank you very much, Dr. Steve, and thank you everyone on the line.
Take care, everyone. Good luck. Wash your hands.